You are hiding in the freezing grass. It is 200,000 BC. A predator is sniffing the air 10 yards away. Your lungs burn, but inside your head there is absolute silence. You aren't whispering a prayer. You aren't planning an escape route. You aren't telling yourself to stay quiet, because language does not exist yet. So how did ancient humans think without language? The answer changes everything we believe about logic, survival, and why your brain works the way it does. Because here is what modern science proved. The silent brain is a supercomputer. But how do you study an ancient mind that left no written records? You strip the words out of a modern one. In 2008, psychologist Russell Hurlburt at the University of Nevada tracked people's random daily thoughts. He found a massive void. For 22% of your waking life, that inner voice is dead. You make decisions, you act, but there are no words, no images, just raw, unsymbolized thought, which means the foundation of your intellect is quiet. And to prove how smart that quiet foundation is, scientists had to look at patients whose brains had been stripped of grammar entirely. In 2016, cognitive scientists Evelina Fedorenko at MIT and Rosemary Varley at University College London studied patients suffering from severe global aphasia. A stroke had physically destroyed the language centers of their brains. They could not speak. They could not understand a sentence. They could not even form a single word in their own heads. If language is the absolute foundation of human thought, these people should have been trapped in a dense mental fog. They weren't. Varley and Fedorenko found these patients could still perform complex math. They solved intricate logic puzzles. They even played music. And just this year, in 2026, an MIT study by Keen and colleagues put healthy adults into fMRI scanners while they solved nonverbal logic problems. The scans proved it. The brain activates a massive network to solve puzzles, and it completely bypasses the language center. You do not need words to be smart. Therefore, your ancestors could be brilliant in total silence. And they were. But that silence came with a brutal cost. Go back 2.6 million years. Your distant ancestors sit in the dirt in Africa and smash rocks together. They create the Oldowan handaxe. It is crude, but it cuts meat. It breaks bones. It keeps them alive. Yet for the next 700,000 years, the design of that tool does not change. 700 millennia, tens of thousands of generations doing exactly the same thing. In 2015, researcher Thomas Morgan at UC Berkeley tested why. He tried to teach modern humans how to make these exact tools using only silent imitation. He found that if you only watch someone do it without any words to explain the invisible physics of the rock, the skill level flatlines. Your ancestors were trapped. They could invent, but without syntax, they could not efficiently pass complex abstract improvements down to their children. And then the silent brain did something impossible. About 1.76 million years ago, a new tool appears, the Acheulean handaxe. Unlike the old smashed rocks, this is a three-dimensional geometric masterpiece. It is shaped like a flawless teardrop. In 1979, cognitive archaeologist Thomas Wynn realized what this meant. To make a symmetrical object out of raw stone, you cannot just smash it and hope for the best. You have to hold a perfect, abstract visual model of the finished tool in your mind, while simultaneously planning exactly where to strike. Decades later, a study by Dietrich Stout at Emory University put modern toolmakers in fMRI scanners. Making these axes heavily activates the pars triangularis, a region in the prefrontal cortex. It requires massive spatial working memory. It requires deep, multi-step planning, and it requires absolutely zero words. They were engineers without a vocabulary. So let's reconstruct a moment. You are sitting in the dust. It is 300,000 years ago. You hold a raw chunk of flint in your left hand, a heavy hammerstone in your right. You do not have a word for rock. You do not have a word for sharp. You do not have a word for tomorrow, but your brain is running a massive, high-speed geometric simulation. You rotate the core. You calculate the exact angle of the crystalline structure. You predict how the shockwave will travel through the stone when you strike. If you hit it wrong, the core shatters. You starve. You do all of this math without a single number. You see the finished blade buried inside the raw stone like an MRI scan. And then you strike. Perfect. A razor-sharp teardrop falls into the dust. Pure, silent engineering. In 1994, archaeologist Eric Boeta showed that this Levallois technique required dozens of precise calculated strikes just to prepare the core before the final blade was ever knocked off. The final product had to be completely visualized before the first strike was ever made. Pure, abstract, silent planning. But it is easy to assume they could only visualize physical rocks. That without language, complex abstract math is impossible. Fair assumption, but the answer comes from a man who lived his entire life in a silent void. In 1991, researcher Susan Schaller sat across from a 27-year-old man named Ildefonso. He was completely deaf. Because of extreme childhood isolation, he had never learned sign language. He had never learned to read. He did not even know that things had names. He had survived for nearly 3 decades using only visual logic. Schaller wanted to see if she could teach him math. How do you explain addition to someone who does not know what a word is? She used objects. She showed him patterns. Within 3 minutes, Ildefonso understood the concept of addition. A few minutes later, he grasped the base 10 number system. Without a single spoken or signed instruction, his brain instantly recognized the underlying logic of the universe. Words do not create logic, they just label it. But there is a catch. Without language, exactness fades. In 2011, researcher Elizabeth Spaepen tested deaf individuals in Nicaragua who only used their own invented gestures called home signs. They had no established words for exact numbers. They could estimate quantities perfectly, but keeping a large, exact number in their head, they couldn't do it. Language is the anchor that stops exact thoughts from drifting away, and numbers and rocks are just objects. The real test of the ancient mind was surviving other people. Try looking at a stranger across a fire and guessing what they are secretly planning. Try understanding a lie. This is called theory of mind. Evolutionary biologists assumed you needed a complex internal monologue to guess what someone else is thinking, but that assumption turned out to be wrong. Very wrong. In 2001, cognitive scientists Inoue Varley and Varley Siegal tested this exact idea. They tracked patients with severe aphasia. The dictionary in their head is just gone. The brain is intact, but the grammar is deleted. Then, Varley and Siegal gave them a theory of mind test. The patients had to watch a complex scenario where someone hides an object, a second person walks in, and the patient has to guess what that second person is falsely believing. You usually talk to yourself to figure that out. You think, he doesn't know the object was moved, so he will look in the wrong place. But these patients had no inner voice to build that sentence. They should have failed completely. They passed perfectly. You do not need to talk to yourself to understand someone else's lie. Empathy and suspicion do not run on words. They run on raw, silent observation. But surviving in the ancient world didn't just require reading minds. It required raw, high-speed processing. And this is where your internal voice actually becomes a liability. Language slows you down. Right now, if you try to memorize a phone number, you repeat it in your head. In 2007, researchers Sana Inoue and Tetsuro Matsuzawa at Kyoto University ran a memory test to see how fast a silent mind really is. They put human university students and chimpanzees in front of touch screens. Numbers flashed randomly across the screen for a fraction of a second, then instantly vanished behind blank white squares. The goal was to tap the squares in the exact numerical order. If you took this test, you would fail. The human subjects took their time, verbally counting in their heads, trying to anchor the visual memory with spoken words. They translated the screen into language, and they lost. The chimpanzees did not. A young chimp named Ayumu looked at the screen for barely 200 milliseconds. A literal fraction of a heartbeat. The screen went blank. Then he flawlessly hit every single square in perfect order. He wasn't naming the numbers. His brain was processing purely visual, spatial data at a speed human language cannot match. Words are a bottleneck. You have to translate reality into a noun, then a verb, then an adjective. It is painfully slow. When you strip words away, the ancient visual brain operates like a supercomputer, taking in the entire environment in a single, silent flash. Therefore, if a silent brain is so fast and so perfectly capable of empathy and engineering, why did your ancestors ever start talking? Because the human brain is so desperate for structure that if language doesn't exist, it will spontaneously hallucinate it into existence. In 2003, cognitive psychologist Susan Goldin-Meadow at the University of Chicago published decades of research on deaf children. These kids had hearing parents and zero access to established sign language. Nobody taught them how to speak. They had absolutely no input, so they invented their own system. Researchers call them home signs. But Goldin-Meadow noticed something bizarre. Without ever hearing a spoken sentence, every single child spontaneously started using strict subject-object-verb patterns. If a child wanted to describe an action, they always structured the gestures in the exact same grammatical order. Every single time. They invented syntax out of thin air. It wasn't taught, it was a biological reflex. The basic structure of language was already hardwired into their silent brains, waiting to break out. But what if you don't even have the raw materials for a silent mind? What happens if your brain deletes both the pictures and the words? In 2015, neurologist Adam Zeman at the University of Exeter named a condition called aphantasia. These people are born completely blind in their mind's eye. If you ask them to remember a loved one's face, they see black. But then researchers found an even deeper, stranger layer, anauralia. Some of these individuals also have absolutely zero internal monologue. Complete radio silence, no pictures, no words, just dark, quiet, conceptual processing. If you ask them to plan their day, they don't see a calendar and they don't hear a voice making a list. They just instantly know what they have to do. And yet they are highly functional. They work as scientists, engineers, and mathematicians. They prove that human logic is not built out of sensory illusions. It is a cold mathematical engine running underneath everything you experience. You do not need a voice to be human, so we know the brain can build complex logic, process threats, and survive in total silence. Therefore, the timeline of your ancestors suddenly becomes a massive mystery. When did the silence actually break? Look at the Neanderthals. For decades, you were taught that they were just just grunting brutes. Heavy brows, crude spears, no complex thought. But in 2007, a team led by Johannes Krause at the Max Planck Institute extracted DNA from Neanderthal bones. They found something impossible, the FOXP2 gene. This is the genetic switch for speech, and they had the exact 2 mutations that allow modern humans to produce complex vocalizations. Your extinct cousins possessed the biological hardware to talk. This means the capacity for speech might stretch back 500,000 years, long before our own species even existed. But this discovery triggered a massive, brutal scientific war. Because biology is not behavior. Possessing the genetic hardware for a voice does not mean you actually have a language, and the real proof of when they finally spoke is hidden in something much stranger than bones. Because a piece of a skull can only tell you if a throat was physically capable of making a sound. It cannot tell you if the brain inside it had a concept for tomorrow. To prove that a language existed, you have to find physical evidence of a thought that could not survive without words. You have to find a symbol. In 2002, archaeologist Christopher Henshilwood was excavating Blombos cave on the coast of South Africa. He uncovered a small chunk of red ochre rock. It is 73,000 years old. It is roughly the size of a modern smartphone, and it wasn't shaped to cut meat. It wasn't a weapon. Someone sat in the dirt, ignoring the immediate demands of hunting and gathering, and deliberately spent hours carving a complex, intersecting, cross-hatched pattern into its surface. They made a deliberate grid, art, because to draw a geometric pattern that has no physical utility, you are doing something impossible for an ape. You are storing an abstract concept completely outside of your own head. But a symbol is completely useless if the person sitting across the fire from you doesn't know what it means. You cannot communicate an abstract geometric concept through raw physical imitation. You have to agree on its meaning beforehand. Therefore, you need syntax, you need words. This is the moment the silence definitively breaks. But the evidence gets even sharper and much stranger. In 1939, researchers excavating a cave in Germany discovered hundreds of shattered fragments of mammoth ivory. When they finally pieced them together, they found a statue, the Lion Man. It is 40,000 years old. It has the upright body of a human and the head of a cave lion. Experimental archaeologists estimate it took 400 hours of highly focused work to carve using only flint tools. That is a month and a half of full-time labor. That is a massive investment of survival energy just to carve a piece of bone. And it is the ultimate proof of a spoken vocabulary. Why? Because you cannot point to a lion man in the real world. It does not exist. You cannot teach someone about a mythical creature by silently pointing at a physical object in the dirt. The only way to share a fantasy is to narrate it. The silent ancient brain could invent a teardrop handaxe because it was grounded in physical geometry. But to invent a god, you need a language, so the timeline snaps into focus. Your ancestors operated as silent, visual supercomputers for millions of years. But eventually they traded that raw cognitive speed for something more powerful: collaboration. The Oldowan toolmakers from 2 million years ago were stuck making the exact same crude rock for 700 millennia. They were trapped because they could only learn by watching. But once language appears, that stagnation shatters. You no longer have to just watch someone hit a stone. They can explicitly tell you to strike it at a specific angle because the stone has a hidden flaw inside. You can explain invisible forces. You can warn someone about a predator that isn't even there yet. Once ancient humans established words for numbers, they could finally anchor massive quantities. They could trade exactly 50 shells with a tribe 20 miles away without anyone losing track. Words did not invent human logic. They acted as external hard drives for it. Language networked the isolated supercomputers together. But modern psychology has a term for what happens when that network never shuts down. They call it cognitive overload. Right now, that voice in your head is running constantly. You use it to plan, to stress, to narrate your own existence. It feels like your entire consciousness is built out of those words. But it isn't. You assume the voice is you. It is just the interface. You think in words because your modern life is an endless stream of abstract social rules. You have to answer emails, read traffic signs, and predict what your boss wants from you. Your ancestors did not have an inbox. They thought in silence because their survival demanded raw, immediate, geometric processing. A spoken sentence takes seconds to construct, but a geometric realization happens in milliseconds. They needed to see the entire environment in a fraction of a heartbeat. They needed to build a teardrop blade in their mind before they ever struck the stone. They did not need to talk to themselves. They needed to survive. And that silent architecture never actually left you. It is still running underneath the noise. In 2007, psychologist Russell Hurlburt published a massive study on human consciousness, and he found something that shocks most people. A huge percentage of modern humans experience vast portions of their day with absolutely no inner monologue. They just know things. They just act. When you have one of those rare moments of pure, unsymbolized thought, when you just know the answer to a complex problem without hearing a single word, when you catch a falling glass before your brain can even narrate the danger, you are not glitching. You are falling back into the original operating system. You are using the exact same silent, brilliant machinery that kept your ancestors alive through ice ages and predators long before anyone knew how to speak. The voice is just an echo. You are the silence.